Regulatory pressure at Google is heating up. Google appeared in court this past Monday, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If found guilty of antitrust, Google is staring down the barrel of a possible breakup. This isn't Google's first foray into some legal hot water. This case is coming off the back of 2 other cases, one of which is already putting Google in the crosshairs of a possible breakup. So this most recent case, if Google is found guilty, definitely adds extra fuel to the breakup fire. But here's the thing, I couldn't be more excited about a possible breakup. And by the end of this video, I think you will be too when we look back at the history of Google. We'll take a look at the history of antitrust legislation in the US and how it minted one of the wealthiest humans of all time. And this will show that it's not necessarily a bad thing for investors when companies are broken up. In fact, it actually could be a good thing. All right, let's bust into it. The first logical question you're probably asking is, why is the mean old government coming after sweet old Google?
Leave him alone! Poor
Google.
Just trying his best. Last thing he needs after a long day at
Controlling 90% of search, trust bust, monopolizing ad spend.
Leave him alone!
Well, to understand it, we need to add the context. So last year in December of 2023, a San Francisco court called Google's App Store an illegal monopoly, causing Apple to go, who, me? But that's not the only reason the government's coming after them. Just last month in August of 24, another suit, this one being brought on by the DOJ. The first one was brought on by Fortnite creator Epic Games. But this DOJ suit found Google's search engine to be an illegal monopoly. And this makes sense if we're being intellectually honest. In what other industry does one company have greater than 90% of the total market? Now, it will be over a year until the judge who sat that case deliberates on exactly what Google's punishment will be. So we're still waiting, but a lot of legal scholars are saying that a breakup just on that case alone is still very probable. And then finally, in a hat trick of lawsuits, another DOJ-led case, which started on September 9th, is alleging that Google has a monopoly on their online advertising technology, and that they have engaged in anti-competitive practices and distorted legitimate competition in the ad tech field. Now, this is one of Google's most serious lawsuits. Peter Cohen, a management professor, said, quote, divestitures are definitely a possible remedy for this second case. And he also said that it could potentially be more significant than initially meets the eye. And remember, this case is being seen by Judge Leone Breakup, who oversaw the trial of one of the 9/11 conspirators, in which he told the defendant that he would, quote, die with a whimper. So this judge is not someone who plays around. This is a very serious judge who will absolutely be ready to throw the book. But here's the thing, we should not fear the reaper here. Google will not die with a whimper if this trust busting takes place. Just like in relationships, most of the time, breakups are good. And they happen when they are well overdue. Here's NYU professor Scott Galloway.
If you were to break this company up, distinct of the weaponization of the platforms, distinct of the power, distinct of their inability to prohibit bad actors from weaponizing their platforms, let's make the shareholder argument. If you look at almost every major breakup, several years post the breakup, the combined companies were worth a great deal more than the original company.
To illustrate this, let's turn back the history books and take a look back at the most famous example of antitrust in American history, and that was the breakup of Standard Oil. I mean, just take a look at the cartoons from the time. There's no question that people really wanted this company to break up. And the government was pretty impotent at doing this. There was a lot of demands to break up the company, but it took this guy to really get things started. And he was able to get antitrust legislation pushed on the grounds of the Sherman Antitrust Act, as well as a bunch of other charges, including predatory and abusive behaviors, corporate espionage, bribery, price manipulation, and a lot more. But really, the end result of all this was Standard Oil being broken up into 43 different companies. All right, that must have been a huge win for the people who want to fight the corporate system and eat the rich, right? Here's the thing. Without that antitrust action, John D. Rockefeller would not be John D. Rockefeller. A few years ago, I read Ron Chernow's excellent book called Titan, which is like an 800-page book or something like that on John D. Rockefeller. And I remembered this paragraph. I actually highlighted it in my Kindle. Chernow writes, those who had seen the Standard Oil dissolution as a condoned punishment for Rockefeller were in for a sad surprise. It proved to be the luckiest stroke of his career. Precisely because he lost the antitrust suit, Rockefeller was converted from a mere millionaire with an estimated net worth of around $300 million in 1911 into something short of history's first billionaire. In December of 1911, he was finally able to jettison the presidency of Standard Oil, but he continued to hold on to his immense shareholding. As the owner of about 1/4 of the shares of the old trust, Rockefeller now got a 1/4 share of the new Standard Oil of New Jersey, one of the companies that got broken up, plus 1/4 of the 33 independent subsidiary companies created by the decision. And it did not include the oil shares he had given to the GEB, University of Chicago, and other recipients of his largesse. So, there's a second paragraph I want to get into because it'll give you some really good insights into what could happen at Google. But basically what that first paragraph said was this trust busting was the very reason why he became one of America's richest people in history. Now the second paragraph goes on to say, at first investors did not know how to value the shares of these Standard Oil components, since Rockefeller had resisted a New York Stock Exchange listing and the old trust never issued reports to shareholders. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. I can already hear people in the comments section comparing Google's trust suit to Microsoft's antitrust penalties that happened in the 90s. But I don't think they're the same, because Microsoft was never broken up. They were originally ordered to, but on appeal, they were able to continue to operate as one single company. But however, it did scare the shit out of them though, and them chilling out is probably why Google was able to get started in the beginning. The reason why I have an iPhone, and the reason why you're not watching this on Standard Oil Tube, is because of antitrust behavior. Alright, so speaking of Google, let's get back to them. What would a potential breakup mean to them? Well, according to Bloomberg, they see a few options. They could be forced to spin off their Android business unit, which means you possibly could see a competitor to Apple emerge. Or they could be forced to spin off Chrome, their web browser. But that one seems unlikely to me because there's not really a lot of money in Chrome. I think the most probable thing they would be forced to spin off would be their advertising business. But the bottom line is it's still too early to tell exactly what a breakup would look like. And there are so many options because Google has so many business units to it. But one Wall Street Journal reporter, Andy Kessler, had a really interesting idea. In a recent piece that he wrote titled, "Is the Google Breakup Coming?" he argues that government shouldn't force a breakup, but instead, companies should take it upon themselves to divest. He points out how HP did their own self-directed breakup when it split its printer business from other enterprise products and how much that helped the stock, or how Johnson & Johnson split off their Band-Aid segment from its drugs and medical devices division, or how eBay spun off PayPal. These are things that have helped shareholders and consumers in every case. He goes on to argue that YouTube should have been spun off years ago to shareholders, or that if Google would have spun off Android, you would have had a company directly competing head-to-head with Apple. And holy cow, just the talk of this is making me start to salivate. Here's Deepwater's managing partner, Gene Munster.
Gene, so what do you think if there were an announcement tomorrow that Google will be broken up? What would the shares do?
I think I'm leaning with Steve on this. I think it's up probably 5% plus. I think ultimately this could unlock 20% of value, put the probability at low, call it 15% that this ultimately some variation of this happens. But to answer your question, is that I think the sum of the parts do unlock value here.
So regardless of whether a spinoff is self-directed or forced, which frankly I'm okay with either, I don't really take the strong position Mr. Kessler did. He argues that if there's no harm taking place to consumers, then there shouldn't be a forced sale by the government. However, I would make the argument that there is harm to consumers and innovation is being stifled. It is very hard to compete with Google and they can turn you off in a heartbeat. But regardless, a spinoff, whether self-directed or forced, would almost definitely give value to shareholders and create a more competitive environment. And so the next logical question is, well, Dave, is Google a buy today? I never give stock tips, but I do love talking about this kind of thing. If we look at the stock, we can see that it's trading at a PE ratio of around 21, which for a growth company isn't really that bad. I mean, if we take a look at their growth metrics, and we'll pull up is the company growing here, we can see that the business over the last 10 years has grown revenue at an 18% rate, and over the last 5 years have grown revenues at a 17% compounded annual growth rate. That's really impressive for a company at a 21 earnings ratio. And net income actually shows a better story. They did 20 and 19% respectively. And free cash flow tells the best story of all. They've grown free cash flow at a 10-year growth rate around 21% and 5-year point of 25%. So yeah, the company's growing really healthily. But for me personally, I'm gonna stay on the sidelines for now, as I think that this uncertainty could cause downward pressure on the stock. I mean, it's already down 8% this month. My biggest fear is that the government once again proves impotent at breaking up Google meaningfully, and this becomes another Microsoft situation. Remember, the early 2000s were a pretty ugly period for Microsoft. It took all the way until 2014 when Satya Nadella took over for Microsoft to really start reviving that innovative culture. We already saw that Google was caught flat-footed in the AI race. I mean, they published the first white paper on what a GPT is. but OpenAI was actually able to release it to the wild. So if they find themselves in this culture that Microsoft found themselves in, it's going to be a long time before we see a breakout company. And they have a lot of room to fall. This is a $1.85 trillion company. So there's a lot of room for Google to fall, and for it to fall hard and fast, as is the case with any technology company. But I am watching. I don't think that there's any company that's higher on my watch list right now. If you'd like to see the last video we did on Google, there's a link to it right here. It may inspire you if you are thinking about adding Google to your position. Thanks again so much to our Patreons for supporting this channel. If you'd like to sign up, there's a link to it in our description. When you join, you'll get exclusive access to our Discord, and you'll also get early access to our Flank investing platform, which will walk you step by step through a research process. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.